those. We're here today on Friday, April 25th, with another great guest that we'll get into shortly. As usual, you can find us on our YouTube channel, John Howard Society of PEI. You can find us on our website, johnhowardsocietyofpei.com, or on our social media. As I'm here, Josh Constantinou, Coordinated Access Coordinator to host, and as usual, I've got Conor here with me.
Hi, everyone. Conor Mullin, President of the John Howard Society of PEI. Glad to be back here again with Josh, back to our regular routine.
Yes, and we're talking about the sort of spring weather, if you will.
Yeah, the beautiful spring we've been having here in Prince Edward Island with record high snowfalls for April. And cold and windy, cold, windy, and wet most of the other days.
All right. Well, speaking of cold, wet weather, introduce Mike here. Mike, welcome in. If you want to tell the folks a little bit about yourself there.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Mike Gallagher. I'm a retired tax inspector, having worked for 43 years for the HM Revenue and Customs. I live with my wife Janet in a lovely little village called Greasby in the northwest of England. Just only a 20-minute drive actually from the centre of Liverpool, so that's quite handy for us. I'm a father of four. I have three grandchildren, and actually there's another grandchild due literally any day now. So we're expecting news on that hopefully very, very soon. You mentioned the weather. Well, actually, we've been having some glorious sunshine over in England. It's unseasonably warm, and next week we're going to be hitting 23 degrees, I believe, on a sort of mini heat wave. So I'm looking forward to that.
Wow.
23 degrees. Wow. That is something.
Well, it's a bit rare. It's a bit rare.
Okay. Well, good for you. Enjoy that weather, and congratulations on the pending birth of grandchild number 4.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. So as we often do, just wanted to delve into John Howard updates. Conor, I'll open it up to you for the board perspective. I don't think we've done this since, I guess, February.
So I guess, Josh, kind of the two of the biggest things that have happened since the last time we did this. First of all, the point in time count numbers have been finalized and publicly released. There's a bit of media coverage of that. But for those who may not have seen it or who don't know what we're talking about, point in time count is a little snapshot that's done of homelessness. Ours was done at the end of October last year, over a 24-hour period, just to get an idea of what the homelessness situation on Prince Edward Island is. And the numbers came out, and our official count is 318 homeless individuals across the island, which is essentially a doubling from the last official numbers that we had. Probably not a true doubling of the size of the problem, because this was the first year that this count was ever done island-wide, particularly the first time it was ever done in Kings County. So rather than a true doubling, it's probably just more of an accurate picture of what the problem has always been, the size of the problem on PEI. And there probably has been a little bit of an increase for sure, given kind of some of the circumstances, particularly the housing crisis and things like that we're still going in. But it was nice to finally get that done and get that released to the public. As I say, there's been some media coverage, and I know we've had some and are going to have some meetings with some municipal and provincial politicians across Prince Edward Island to talk about these things and what we can do to try and address the issue. So that's always positive when we get when there's interest and action being taken. So that's one big update. And the other update, which is probably a little bit more exciting to our staff than to anyone listening, but is that we've expanded our space at our office in downtown Charlottetown. We're going to have some ground floor space available now for meeting with clients. And the big thing is that Josh and some of our other staff who work out of our kind of satellite office in Sherwood are going to be brought out of the cold and down into the fold, the family fold down in our downtown office. So we'll have everybody all in one place and in a bigger, brighter, more accessible space. So that's something we're very excited about.
Yeah, no, it's a great update. We're all excited, and I think just the improvement of communication, being in the same space, will be huge.
Absolutely. Yep.
It'll be nice to be able to just walk down the hall and connect with folks versus emails and phone calls and other things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's always a benefit to having everybody on the team in one space together.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so the only other thing I had to note was we have continued to do the CRA Service Canada tax clinics.
Yeah.
And so we did the first one out in Summerside last 2 weeks ago. And there was 8 people that got served there with tax returns and stuff. So considering it was the first one in Summerside and the location, we got some feedback, was a little harder to find in the basement. I think 8 people is a really good turnout.
That's great. Yeah, say with tax season underway here, I know that those tax clinics are going to be ramping up and keeping very busy.
Yeah. So for those that aren't familiar, we do tax returns, and there's an opportunity for people to meet with CRA and Service Canada on site to resolve account issues, login issues, ID issues, change of address issues, whatever might be restricting them from receiving the benefits and income that they are entitled to.
Yeah. And I guess something else, Josh, too, because while tax season is underway, election season is also underway with the federal election happening on Monday. We have been in contact with some workers from Elections Canada who've provided us with some information about how people who are currently unhoused can vote and what they need to vote. That information is on our Facebook page and our website. So if anyone is unhoused or knows someone who is unhoused who wants to vote, you can find the information on those 2 places, johnhowardsocietypei.com and facebook.com John Howard Society PEI, or drop in or call John Howard Society and we can give you that information as well.
Perfect. Okay, well, speaking of taxes, let's turn it over to Mike to tell us a little bit about, what a tax inspector does, what that role consisted of, and anything else you want to jump in with there, Mike.
Okay, yeah. Well, it might be interesting to learn that I didn't put my hand up in class and say, I want to be a tax inspector when I grow up. I kind of drifted into the job quite literally. I was age 16, I just left school, and I really did not have the slightest clue of what I wanted to do. And it was my father who noticed there was an advert in a local paper saying that a job's going in the local tax office. I thought, well, do I really want to be part of a tax office setup? It sounds a bit stuffy to me, but he said it'll be good experience. I went along, and lo and behold, I was offered the job there and then, and could I start the following Monday. So I did start the following Monday, but I didn't go in as a tax inspector. You've got to work your way through the system. So there I am, 16, not having a clue about taxes, but the people I work with were very friendly, very welcoming, and I quickly picked up what needed to be done with the benefit of various courses I had to go on as well. But at that level, it was just dealing with ordinary taxpayers who had tax repayment issues. We had a pay-as-you-earn system over here, and we operate tax codes. The employer takes weekly amounts or monthly amounts of tax off the pay that's received. So there were lots of queries around that kind of thing. We had telephone calls, mail, and face-to-face meetings. We had an inquiry counter where people could just wander in and say, I need to speak to somebody about my tax. So that was all very, very good. So it was a good grounding for what was to follow later. And I must have been doing something right, because along the way, in 1977, I was asked if I would like to become what they called a tax officer higher grade, which involved more complex work and management responsibilities. And what kind of helped things along the way, if it can be indulgent for a second, was in 1974, a girl called Janet joined the office, and I was taken by her straight away, and she later became my wife in 1977. So my promotion and getting married happened at the same time for us, which was quite fortuitous, really. And so I just knuckled down to work, got on with things. But I never was really that ambitious. I've been very lucky the way that things happened for me. It seemed to be that if I did a good job, people in a position of power would come to me and say, you're doing a real good job there. How would you like to go on an inspector training course? So I thought, well, that sounds really good. So that was quite difficult, bookkeeping courses, and there was an exam you had to pass at the end of it before you could become a qualified tax inspector. But I did all the hard work, got through the exam fine. And then there was a kind of major change in our life in a way in 1986 because we were transferred from where we were in the northwest in a lovely holiday place called Southport. And I was transferred across nearly 300 miles away to the East Coast, a tax office called Great Yarmouth. And we left everything we knew. By that time, I had 3 children. The eldest one was 5 years old at that time, our Lucy. So we gave up everything we knew, but my wife and I said, well, we'd always said if it came to it and we were asked to move that we would, so we did. And retrospectively, it was one of the greatest things we ever did because we had to go out and make new friends. We had to find our way in a different part of the country. Although obviously England's a small country in comparison to Canada, the accents are different, the colloquialisms are all different. And it was no different when we went to the East Coast, and people didn't really understand my Liverpudlian accent very well at first. But yeah, we got on fine. And again, I was made to feel very, very welcome there. And the work I had to do there, I was actually investigating for the first time businesses and accounts. So accounts would be submitted as required for businesses and individuals. And I would be my job to look at these accounts and decide, well, hang on, they've only made £2,000 profit, but they're driving around in a Mercedes. How does that work out? So there was those sort of issues that highlighted particular cases. So we'd invite people in to an interview, we'd explain we had concerns, and then we'd actually work through together. And they usually had a qualified accountant with them. And I'd say, I'm not happy, go away, actually present the accounts the way they should be. And often that resulted in additional taxes, which needed to be paid. Not just taxes, but there was interest due on additional tax that was brought about as a result of my inquiry, and there were penalties as well on top of that. So it was fairly, there was a lot of issues around not just the tax that needed to be paid, but in addition, it was punitive. And it was kind of a lesson to others to say, well, you mustn't be doing this, because if you do and you get caught, you're not just going to have to pay the back taxes. You're also going to have to pay a lot more than that as well. But put simply, an inspector's job is actually to make sure that people pay the right amount of tax at the right time. But there's an awful lot of complexity in between that. But I did enjoy my time over on the East Coast. And again, someone was looking after me, and I managed to secure a further promotion and to become what was called a fully trained inspector of taxes. And the study for that was, I have to say, was really, really hard. And it was a long time previously that I'd left full-time education, but I was now doing law, accountancy at a very high level. And the study was over 18 months. And the exams were actually over 2 days. And there were 3 exams, and you had to get a minimum of 70% in each of those exams in order to get through and qualify as a certified as a certified inspector of taxes. I managed to get through all that. It wasn't easy, but a lot of hard work went into it, but we got through at the other end, and that was fine. And I duly got my inspector qualification certificate, which was signed by the chairman of the Board of Inland Revenue, which it was then. The Inland Revenue became, after 2005, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, on a merger with the former Customs and Excise Office. And of course, it's now His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, following the sad demise of Queen Elizabeth. This was an important part of my career, if you like, because in law, it now permitted me to deal with the highest level of companies, corporations, partnerships, where business turnovers could be in millions and millions of pounds. My job was to review the tax accounts of these concerns to see if the profits declared were in order or if adjustments were required. Some of the accounts were thicker than telephone directories with all sorts of complexities in them. things which would bore the pants off most people: amortizations, depreciation reserve accounts, capital allowances, bad debt reserves, and any number of things that you had to know about in order to spot them. But the adjustments required often run into hundreds of thousands of pounds. But that wasn't to say anything was sinister or intentional. Some of those were just interpretations of law and that sort of thing. So some of the bigger companies I dealt with, it was very unusual for them to be into evasion and fraud. That tended to be single sole directed kind of companies where they had the opportunity to massage the figures in a particularly bad way. So I was working out on the East Coast there, and then a senior HMRC official came to look at my work and asked me if I'd like to be part of a very exclusive office looking at the most serious fraud cases where often over millions of pounds had been defrauded. That was called a Serious Compliance Office and happened to be back up in the Northwest. So again, my wife and I said, well, we've laid our sort of roots now on the East Coast. It means uprooting the children who were much older, and I'd quite another child by then. Our David was number 4. He was born there. So it meant uprooting the family and coming back to the Northwest, which we duly did. I don't know if you guys at this stage want to say anything, or because I'll just rabbit on forever. if you I can carry on if you want, but I don't know if you have any questions at this stage.
Yeah, actually, Mike, I have a quick question here, and it might be something you're getting to as you're talking about working on more serious fraud cases. But you had mentioned kind of people come to you with problems, and you'd say to them, "All right, like go redo the figures, bring them back to me properly," and then there could be penalties there. But did you ever, or did you often have cause to refer people for criminal prosecution for any type of tax evasion or other kind of malfeasance?
Yeah, you actually just preempted where I was just leading up to, because what I've been talking about is really a progression through my career, dealing with the more low-level sort of cases, building up to the higher level ones. And this sort of office that I've just described, the senior, the special compliance office, they dealt with the most serious cases there. But the Board of Inland Revenue at that time, they didn't necessarily want to send people to prison and criminally investigate them. They were much preferred to take the money in if they could. So this special compliance office operated under a very special code of practice. And it was then, they knew when we invited them into that office, there was something very serious going down. And they'd come with their accountants and we'd explain and we'd read out a set of questions to them. And it was their one opportunity to say, okay, I've been at it for years. I owe you thousands and thousands of pounds. I'll do a report and I'll pay all the monies. They also had to produce what was called a statement of worldwide assets. So they couldn't have any secret squirrel bank accounts hidden away anywhere. Now, if they signed this and then we subsequently found, actually, because of all the intelligence that was available to us that they didn't know we had, then that became a very serious matter indeed. And that was the Board of Inland Revenue's policy to prosecute such individuals. But it wasn't just that situation where we gave them an opportunity. Some things, and this is a word that was used a lot in taxes, was heinous. If it was a very heinous situation, they weren't given that opportunity to put the affairs in order. We would just pounce and say, look, you're now under criminal investigation. That could be where we had evidence that it was the offences were so bad that people had actually created false invoices, they'd used diversion tactics. It could be that the person that was committing the fraud was a person of authority, involved in the criminal justice system themselves, should have known better. So the policy was to only take on those cases which would probably act as a major deterrent. So it wasn't like we could see a crime had been committed, unlike the police force, where we had to investigate every crime criminally. The board had at its discretion the ability to decide which cases it wanted to take forward. And then after I spent 2 years, that was 1996 when I joined the Special Compliance Office. 2 years later, I joined a criminal investigation office which dealt solely, it didn't deal with any civil matters at all. It dealt solely with criminal investigation cases. And these were the ones, these heinous cases, as I talk about. But that, again, was a game changer for me in terms of my career, because everything I'd learned about becoming a tax inspector was all very relevant, but now I had to learn a whole new set of rules, and it was all about becoming a specialist in criminal investigation. We were operating under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act now, which obviously set out in statute as to what we could and couldn't do. I now obtained certain powers I never had before. I could go to a court and ask for a production order, which would impel a bank to give me every single detail there was on an individual without that individual knowing that I had that information.
Wow.
These were only powers that came to me as a result of becoming a criminal investigator. And we had something that was introduced called the Proceeds of Crime Act, which helped criminal investigations enormously, because what that meant is some people, say they defrauded £2 million, they might get a 4-year jail sentence for that, of which they would probably only serve 2. And they might think, well, actually, £1 million a year is not bad. I'm prepared to live with that. And that's not bad. But the Proceeds of Crime Act, not only did they have to do jail time for the very serious offences they committed, we could also take assets away from them that had been gained during the process of their fraud. And as an example of that, it's quite extreme, but one case I personally investigated, the guy he'd obtained a series of mortgages on London properties by fraud. He'd made false applications, and the rents he was getting from these properties he never declared. And that was how we kind of got onto him in a way. But he'd used all the rental income, massive amounts of money, and he bought a London hotel. And he never told us about the hotel either. But so when we came to look at what the proceeds of crime were from there, one of the proceeds was this hotel. But of course, given the passage of time, the asset itself had appreciated considerably. So when we come to take or confiscate the asset, it was worth way, way more than the amount of tax that he defrauded. But the Proceeds of Crime Act allowed us to do that. So people were now not just doing jail time, but they were losing everything that caused them to go to jail in the first place. So that was a real eye-opener for us. So prosecution work, I have to say, was probably the most interesting aspect of all my 43-year career in taxes. It was exciting, it was challenging, it was terrifying at times when you had to appear in court and you had a wily old defence counsel, some household name counsels who try and use every trick in the book to rubbish you basically in front of the jury. But our cases generally were very, very strong. We wouldn't take a case unless we had all the correct evidence to support it. And we also had to pass a test before we could actually get, not me personally, the case had to be subject to a review by a lawyer. Originally, it was Inland Revenue lawyer, and then it became the Crown Prosecution Service. And they had to decide whether the case merited going forward for criminal investigation. And if that was the case, there was also a public interest case. Is it in the public interest for this case to go forward? And you could have a situation where a guy had defrauded, yes, he'd been found guilty, or sorry, he was likely to be found guilty, but he was in extreme ill health, medical certificate supported, he may not have long to live. So those sorts of considerations were made. So it was very exciting. In terms of evidence gathering and things like that, wow, talk about seat of your pants. We used to do these early morning raids that you may have heard about or sometimes seen on TVs and some of these drama things. But they're very real. We get a warrant from a court, search warrant. We have a team, knock on a door, 6 o'clock in the morning, no answer. The police are there, bash the door in. We go in, explain who we are, serve the warrant, and then start searching for all the evidence and gathering it and taking it away. So there was quite an adrenaline rush on those sort of days when we were doing those sort of things. And because of the rise, if you like, in the rank through the years. I've been a team leader on such raids. I've actually been in control when we've had as many as 300 officers around the
Wow.
country, standing in place with a go, 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 200 locations maybe for some of the more really major fraud cases that we have. Lorry loads of evidence gathered, brought back, handed over to a property officer, everything logged carefully, bagged. So it was always continuity of evidence all the way through. So those were the most exciting days, really, of my career. Probably, I used to have dark hair at one time. My hair's very light at the moment because it came with management responsibilities as well. So managing some of these cases where multi-million pounds were involved, it would only take one thing to go wrong, and you may not be able to get the case home. So that was a really exciting time for me. And although when you asked would I come on the show here today, the podcast, I thought, well, is anyone really going to be interested in the life of a tax inspector? But I can assure anybody who's still listening that it really was exciting. And my situation is a case of a guy who didn't know what he was going to do in life, drifted into a job. Was I even going to stay there? Maybe, maybe not. And somehow or other, someone said, well, you're quite good at what you're doing. And 43 years later, I'd risen through the organization, done a whole variety of jobs, which I was really, really grateful for. Met some fantastic people along the way. So I could not probably have had a better career than I've had.
Plus, you got married and had 4 kids out of it.
Well, I was going to say actually before we concluded, the revenue's given me a great, great career. Not one I was expecting. I've been very, very fortunate, but the most fortunate thing for me was in 1974 when Janet entered my life, known as Jan by everybody. Got married in 77 and we had the children, and the career gave us a solid base for financially. We struggled in the early years, obviously, when I was in fairly low grades, but as we got through the ranks and that, we became a little bit more comfortable. So I have a lot to be thankful for. I never took anything for granted. And yeah, I look back now, I took on some of the biggest lawyers in the land and came out winning on the other side. I'm proud to say that we were able to confiscate a London hotel, a yacht in Spain, and a French chateau as well. How about that?
Wow. So,
Yeah.
Mike, did you find like when the cases got to the point where they were being criminally investigated and prosecuted, in those
Yep.
cases, were people mostly looking at jail as the sentence, or were there often just monetary penalties imposed?
No. When I was in criminal investigation, these were the most serious cases, often involving over £1 million of taxes which had been defrauded. And in those cases, there was no option for the judge or anybody to say, well, I'll give you a deferred sentence. They were guided by the specific guidelines where tax fraud exceeded certain amounts that determined the length of the sentence. So it was always pretty much custodial unless something dramatic happened, like there was a very ill health
Right.
claim made, which was substantiated, where it wasn't appropriate for somebody maybe to go to jail when they only had a few months left, but of their lives left. But yeah, that's the level we were at there.
Wow.
Unlike the serious compliance office, where there was this opportunity to come clean once a case got to the criminal investigation office, it was very much that's it. If I were you, I'd go down the mitigation route rather than try and resist us or plead not guilty.
Right.
So the interviews under caution were another area that we had to learn, and it interests me when I see crime dramas on TV, and it's all very kind of looks very, very whatever, exciting, but once you've done a few and you keep doing it, it becomes quite routine after a while, actually. Not for the individuals concerned, I accept, but it was part and parcel of our job. Yeah.
And what's the longest jail sentence that you ever saw someone get for any kind of tax malfeasance?
Yeah, it always seemed to be around the 4-year mark. The judges, there were some cases where literally, if it was a crown, an offence against the crown, there was unlimited. The judge could say, "I'm sending you to jail forever," but
Right.
there were guidelines, and everything had to be looked at in perspective. We're actually talking about financial crime here. We're not talking about murders and
Yeah.
all sorts of horrible things that happen out there, which carry much greater sentences. So although it was open to a judge to send somebody to jail for an indeterminate amount for a very serious tax fraud, that was never the case. They had everything in proportion. So the longest one I had with the London hotel person, they got 4 years, and the confiscation side of the assets was almost as bad as them doing jail time.
Yeah, I'd
And
imagine.
just an interesting point on that was actually if under the proceeds of crime order, they had to pay the tax back. It wasn't like they went to jail or paid the taxes. They went to jail and they had to pay the millions of pounds. And if they did not pay the millions of pounds, then that incurred its own jail sentence on top of the existing jail sentence. So it is possible on top of the 4 years, they could get another 4 years if they defaulted on the amounts or the asset recovery that we were entitled to.
And when you're seizing these assets like the hotel or the chateau or the yacht,
Yeah.
that counts towards the tax that they're required to pay back?
Yes, it does. There's like a double jeopardy thing,
Right.
really. In strict law, we were entitled to the taxes, and then separately under the Proceeds of Crime Act, the actual value of the assets as well. But there was common sense dictates that actually you're now getting far more than you're entitled to. If
Yeah.
you add the taxes on as well, that's not any sort of equity. And I think that's the view that was taken, although in the strict legal sense, that's not the position, but in a practical sense, that's the way it was. Yeah.
And did you find that a lot of these cases you were investigating criminally, were they primarily kind of just otherwise legitimate business people who were, engaging in malfeasance to enrich themselves? Or did you often find you were running up against kind of organized crime or things like that?
Well, you kind of bring me now to the last part of my career where I actually did leave criminal investigation. A former boss of mine in criminal investigation was working for HMRC Charities division. And he said to me, I need somebody to set up a counter fraud team and introduce a counter fraud strategy because we've got organized criminals who are now trying to attack our systems. I mean, I think all charities, what you're talking about. But actually, there's something in the UK called gift aid. And what it is, an individual who is a taxpayer, if they donate money to a charity, because they've actually paid tax on that money, if you sign a declaration and say, I wish this to be paid under the gift aid system, the charity can then say, hang on, this payment I've received has suffered tax. So I want to claim some tax back on that. It's not quite as straightforward as that. There's calculations, but in broad principle, that's the way it works. Well, organised crime gangs, they think, well, any government department that's paying out money, how can we find our way in there? So what was happening is we were getting situations where legitimate charities, absolutely no problems whatsoever, but some of the smaller charities at first, these bad people would start becoming trustees of these charities, and then they displace the existing legitimate trustees. So what we are now looking at was potentially a crime venture. And what they would do is the gift aid forms, they'd actually fill in with fictitious names, fictitious amounts that they donated to charities, which never actually existed at all. The amounts were just fictitious. And the way the system operated at the time was that charities were regarded as trustworthy, they're not going to be bad people who are going to be cheating the revenue at all. But my expertise from criminal investigation and the team I developed brought a criminal investigative mind to, hang on, you might think these are nice soft cuddly charities and nothing's ever gone wrong with them, but you're actually dealing with criminals dressed up as a charity. So that's the kind of situation where we came across organized crime gangs. And we were quite successful in the strategies that I introduced, that we introduced far more checks as to, hang on, have these donations actually taken place? Who are these trustees? Let's check the background. Oh, look, these people have actually been done for fraud before. They've served jail time. So these were the kind of areas that I introduced. And then the fraud aspects of that reduced drastically. And we did refer cases onto my former colleagues in criminal investigation. And there were some successful prosecutions on the back of that. But yeah, the revenue in other departments also suffered fraud because they dealt with not just collecting tax, but they also dealt with things like tax credit payments going out. So anything that went out from the department was vulnerable to attack. So we needed pretty strong counter fraud measures in there. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, and that kind of gets me sort of the next thing I want to talk about and say, talk about sort of tax fraud or other kinds of
Mm,
malfeasance in terms of people maybe not properly reporting or defrauding businesses or
mm,
government of all this money. But what about sort of people who are, in receipt of government benefits like
yeah.
unemployment insurance or like
Yeah.
social assistance? Like, did you find that there was much fraud in those areas?
Yeah, I think it's important to distinguish here that we had the Department for Works and Pensions that actually dealt with all of the outward going benefits,
Okay.
job seekers allowance, all those kind of payments, personal payments for incapacity, those sort of things. They were massively exposed. I know from dealing with colleagues who work in those departments that yes, that's a very, very rife thing. But they weren't necessarily organized crime gangs, although crime gangs did move in there and try to milk millions out uh, through a very sophisticated system, all sort of false details, false passports, false IDs, all sorts of things going on. But unfortunately, it was also individuals who were financially in trouble. They might have thought it was an easy way to maybe get some additional monies, but I can't speak with any authority on that side of it. My role as a tax inspector was very much in regards to tax, as opposed to any outgoing benefits. The only things we did deal with, as I say, were some of the lesser benefits, family tax credits, that sort of thing that were going out. And again, they were vulnerable to attack. But I was not personally involved in those aspects.
Okay. Wow. Great. Well, thanks, Greg. I think that answers all my questions. Josh, sorry, I don't know if I kind of monopolized the time there. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
No, I think that covered a lot of what I was curious about. Sort of what kind of things did you see and deal with,
Mm.
and
Yep,
sort of how did you get to where you were? And
yep,
I guess is there, you talked a bit about sort of how you rose and the evolution. Is
yeah.
there anything in terms of kind of the evolution of tax and criminal activity and how that relates either throughout your career or since you've retired that you've noticed or anything else in that
Yeah,
regard?
I think fraud is on a much bigger scale these days and towards the end of my working career than it ever was back in the 70s. Um, Clearly, there was always a situation where somebody who ran a corner shop may not put everything through the till, that sort of thing. But over the years, it's become far more sophisticated, particularly with organised crime. That was never really a thing back in the 70s. Plus, as a countermeasure from the taxes side, the revenue side, intelligence gathering is so much better now than it ever was. And even countries now give information to each other under some of the G7 agreements that have been reached. And people who may think, well, I've got bank accounts in foreign jurisdictions, no one's ever going to find out about that. Well, these days there are situations where automatically the foreign jurisdiction will write to our HMRC and say, are you aware that this individual of such and such an address has 5 bank accounts with us, each with £500,000? So that's a whole new ball game compared to what I started off with in the 70s. The revenue now has a whole industry of intelligence gatherers and mechanisms in place to both receive and give information globally. So it's become a global thing now rather than an individual thing. Yeah.
And I wonder, and Mike, maybe this question might be sort of too vast in the time that we have left, but in your many years and working under many different governments and sort of political ideologies, through the
Mm.
Thatcher era in the 80s and whatnot, did you find that there was any can you summarize sort of changes that you've seen in kind of the tax system or how taxation is treated over these different eras? And did you ever find that there were times when maybe there was some difficulty doing your job, not enough resources, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, it goes with the territory. When I started off in the 70s, the whole economic situation was different to how it is now. Obviously, I just simply walked into a job. I could have chosen any job I wanted back in them days. That the world was a kind of a different place, if you like. Everything seemed a bit simpler in many ways. But over the years, I'm not sure how big the civil service was then, but it's always been a political hot potato for whoever's coming into power to reduce the size of the civil service. And it's something that has always gone on. So I personally have been in situations where we've lost staff members that were never replaced. It placed a huge burden on me personally, having to put more hours in. And as an inspector, I didn't really have allocated hours. I just had to get the job done. So that was kind of difficult trying to work out the priorities. There were time pressures there. But again, with good management, good self-management of what are your priorities, what really has to be done, what can wait a little bit. So over the years, I've certainly had to manage my time better, my resources better as a manager. But the one thing I never did, because it was pointless, is say, well, we need more staff. We can't do this, because that was always going to fall on deaf ears. You always had to find a way to manage, and a good manager, I'm not saying I was a good manager, but that's the mentality of a good manager is, these are the cards I've been dealt. Let's play our best hand. Let's not play the hand we wish we'd had. So yes, I'm not going to get into any politics. You mentioned a certain politician along the way. Yeah, economically, there've been times when it's been harder than others. There's been more demands on the likes of the tax office to say, we need more income. Can you do more with less people? So I've certainly felt those pressures over the years. Yes.
Yeah. No, very good, very good. All right.
I think that was anything else I had. Is there anything else you wanted to add or share with us, Mike, before we move towards wrapping up?
Okay. All I'd like to say from a personal perspective is that I've met many lovely people while I've been working in the Inland Revenue and then HMRC. Kathy and Martin Dutton, who I met over in Norfolk, who moved over to Prince Edward Island, like I was saying in our little chat before we went live. They're, we're really great friends. We visited them. They visited us here. We've met Kate and Paul, they're good family friends. We keep in touch. That was in Norfolk again. Met Sarah, she comes and visits. Linda and John. Sadly, John's passed away now, but keep in touch with Linda. So these are lifelong friends over many, many years. And I'm so grateful that, I've been able to make friends with these people and enjoy the job at the same time. So I regard myself as a very lucky and fortunate boy. There you go.
Thank you.
That's great. No, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot for that, Mike. And Mike had mentioned a little chat that we were having before here, and Mike was telling us that he had been to PEI before, but that he visited during White Wan, which was for those of us who were here at the time, we know quite a significant and sort of unnatural snowfall. So, Mike, I definitely say we'd love to have you back on PEI anytime, but maybe try to come during the summer months.
Yeah, I'd love to go again, and we promised Kathy and Martin at some stage we will get back. Looking forward to it.
Yeah,
great.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. A reminder to everybody out there, you can find us on John Howard Society of PEI YouTube channel, website, or social media. Conor, anything else you want to throw out there before we wrap up?
Yeah, just say to all of our listeners, please check us out on social media. On our YouTube page, you can find archived all of our prior podcasts. Please give those a listen, like and subscribe to our social media. If anyone's interested in the John Howard Society in general, the work that we do, please reach out. You can find contact information on our website. I think any one of our staff or members of our board would be happy to talk to you. If you're interested in volunteering or careers with the John Howard Society, reach out. If anyone's interested in potentially joining the board of directors, again, please reach out. You can submit an application there. I guess as it is tax season and people are getting their taxes done, maybe let this podcast serve as a little bit of a warning to you that if you're not being entirely honest with what you're doing, someone like Mike might come knocking on your door, and you don't want that to happen. And again, and not to get into politics, but it is election season, so however you do vote, everyone try and get out and vote for the 28th.
Very good. Okay, well, thank you again, Mike, so much for joining us, and thanks everybody for listening, and take care, Mike. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, Mike.